Two people. Two mailboxes. The exact same envelope lands in both of them, on the exact same day, for almost the exact same amount. One of them lies awake some nights doing math in her head, wondering if the check will still stretch far enough by winter. The other hasn't checked his bank balance in 3 months because he genuinely doesn't need to. Same envelope. Same number. Two completely different relationships with fear. Now here's the part that should bother you. If a researcher called both of them and asked, "What percentage of your monthly income comes from Social Security?" they would give the exact same answer. 95%. Word for word, number for number, identical. That's the statistic behind one of the most repeated warnings in personal finance, that roughly a quarter of retirees are dangerously dependent on a government check. According to data commonly cited from federal surveys on retiree finances, that number is real. It's accurate. Nobody made it up. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous, because the math checks out, but the meaning almost never does. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why two people can share the identical statistic and live in two entirely different financial realities. And you might realize you've been misreading this number your whole life. Let's start with the woman in the first house, because her story is the one most people assume this statistic is describing. Elaine is 76. Her husband passed 6 years ago. For most of her working life, she raised 3 kids and worked part-time at a school cafeteria, not the kind of job that comes with a pension or a 401 match. Today, her Social Security check is $1,650 a month. It is, without exaggeration, almost her entire income. When Elaine hears a headline that says a quarter of retirees rely almost entirely on Social Security, she nods. That's her. That's exactly her life. And for a lot of people, that's where the story stops the scary statistic. Confirmed. Case closed. But here's the sentence almost nobody says out loud. Elaine is not the only person hiding inside that number. The statistic itself only measures one thing: income, not savings, not property, not what someone owns outright, just the deposits that land in a checking account that month. And that one missing word, wealth, is doing an enormous amount of hidden work. Think of it like being handed a photograph of someone's dinner plate and being asked to guess how wealthy they are. If the plate only has vegetables from a home garden on it, you might assume they're struggling. But some people eat only from the garden because it's all they have. Others eat only from the garden because it's harvest season. And their pantry, freezer, and bank account are all sitting full, untouched, right behind them. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but surely most people relying that heavily on Social Security really are in Elaine's situation. That's a fair instinct. And it's exactly the instinct we're about to test, because 2 doors down from Elaine, statistically speaking, is someone who breaks that assumption completely. Meet Robert. He's 74. Retired after a 35-year career as an engineer, and he receives $2,800 a month from Social Security. He also has $1.4 million sitting in a brokerage account. Run the numbers, and Robert's monthly income is roughly 95% Social Security. Officially, statistically, he belongs in the exact same heavily dependent 25% as Elaine. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Robert isn't struggling. Robert made a decision, together with a financial advisor, to cover this year's living expenses using the money that costs the least to touch his Social Security check and to leave his $1.4 million invested and compounding untouched for as long as possible. This is often called bucket sequencing, and it's one of the most well-established strategies in retirement income planning. Think of it like deciding which appliance to run first in your house to avoid tripping the breaker. You don't run everything at once, you sequence it, because some sources are simply cheaper to draw from than others. Social Security has real, structural advantages that make it a natural spend-first bucket. It doesn't require selling an investment, so there's no risk of selling low during a downturn. In many cases, it's taxed more favorably than a full withdrawal from a traditional 401 or IRA, where every dollar counts as fully taxable ordinary income. And it arrives automatically, market crash or market boom, it doesn't care. But here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Behavioral economists have a name for why almost nobody thinks about Social Security this way. It's called mental accounting, a concept popularized by Nobel-winning research on how people mentally sort money into separate buckets instead of treating it as one interchangeable pool. Most retirees treat their Social Security check as spending money and their brokerage account as serious money, even though, dollar for dollar, they're identical. That mental separation is exactly why sequencing strategies work so well, and exactly why almost nobody notices when a wealthy retiree like Robert is quietly using it. So, Elaine and Robert. Same statistic, same 95%. One of them has no other option. The other one is executing a strategy most people don't even know exists. If a stat can't tell these two apart, that raises an uncomfortable follow-up question. How good is the underlying data really? And where else might it be blurring the picture? That question has a very specific answer, and it comes down to how this information gets collected in the first place. Most of what we know about how retirees are financially supported comes from self-reported surveys, real people answering questions about their own finances, often from memory, without pulling up a single statement. The Federal Reserve, for example, regularly surveys households on economic well-being, and studies like these are frequently the source behind headlines exactly like the one that opened this video. Here's the twist most people never consider. Self-reported data has a well-documented weak spot. People are inconsistent about what counts as income, and they're especially bad at remembering anything that doesn't arrive as a predictable monthly deposit. Take Frank and Linda, a retired couple in their late 60s. They own their home outright, worth around $350,000. They also have a rental property that happens to be sitting empty between tenants that particular month, so it generated zero income. When a survey asks Frank what percentage of his income came from Social Security, he does the honest math on what actually hit the bank account. Social Security was the only thing that arrived. So, he answers close to 100%. But is that the full truth? Frank and Linda are sitting on nearly $500,000 in real estate that simply isn't converting into a monthly deposit that specific month. Researchers sometimes call this the iceberg problem. Surveys are excellent at capturing what's visible above the waterline, the steady, predictable, paycheck-like deposits. But they're far weaker at capturing everything sitting quietly underneath. And here's where it gets genuinely surprising. This isn't a flaw unique to retirement surveys. The same blind spot shows up in how we measure poverty, homelessness, and even small business income. Anytime researchers rely on self-reported cash flow instead of total assets, the picture skews toward whoever has the least visible wealth, regardless of what's sitting just out of frame. So, line up what we've built so far. Elaine, genuinely dependent. No cushion. Robert, wealthy, deliberately sequencing. Frank and Linda, asset-rich, but statistically invisible. All three folded into one identical-looking 25% statistic. The data isn't lying. It's just measuring a much narrower slice of reality than the headline implies. At this point, you might be thinking, fine, but even if the number is exaggerated, isn't there still a real group of people who are fully, genuinely dependent on Social Security with nothing else at all? Yes, Completely, that group is real, and it deserves attention on its own terms, not buried inside a misleading average. So let's go find them and see what actually separates them from everyone else in this conversation. For the average retired household, Social Security is a big slice of the pie, often the single largest slice, but it's rarely the whole pie. Layered around it are retirement account withdrawals, pension income for the shrinking share of workers who still have one, part-time work in the early retirement years, and investment income. Take Mark and Carol. He spent 30 years in manufacturing with a modest pension attached. Carol worked part-time for most of her career while raising their kids, which means she has a smaller Social Security benefit of her own tied to her own earnings record. Together, their household draws from 4 separate sources his pension, both of their individual Social Security checks, and a small IRA his employer helped him start late in his career. No single source dominates, it's a genuine blend, and it looks nothing like Elaine's situation, even though both households technically receive Social Security. Now here's where the story gets its emotional edge. Mark didn't always feel financially secure. 10 years before retiring, he assumed his pension alone would be enough, and he barely contributed to his IRA, a decision he now openly regrets. Because those extra 10 years of compounding, even at modest contribution levels, would have meaningfully changed his retirement cushion today. His story is a quiet, honest reminder that comfort now can sometimes mean regret later. The households that are genuinely, fully dependent on Social Security, the Elaines of the world, tend to share specific, identifiable characteristics: shorter working careers, lower lifetime earnings, health conditions that interrupted their ability to save, or simply no access to an employer retirement plan for much of their working life. That's a real and serious issue. But it's a narrower group than 1 in 4 retirees, and folding every high-reliance household into that same category flattens genuinely different life stories into one misleadingly uniform number. Here's a piece of historical context that changes how you should feel about all of this. When Social Security was created in 1935 as part of the New Deal, it was explicitly designed as a floor, a guaranteed baseline meant to prevent poverty in old age, not to replace personal saving entirely. That was the stated intention from day one. So discovering that a chunk of retirees lean on it heavily isn't proof the system is broken. In many cases, it's proof the floor is holding exactly where it was built to hold. But if Social Security was only ever meant to be a floor, that raises a sharper question: how is that floor actually constructed? Why does Elaine get $1,750 a month while Robert gets $2,800 and someone else might get $3,600? The answer isn't random, and once you understand the mechanism, an entirely new insight opens up about why the average benefit looks the way it does. Social Security isn't a flat one-size-fits-all check. It's calculated, and the calculation rewards one thing above almost everything else: consistency over time. According to the Social Security Administration's own published methodology, your benefit is based on your 35 highest earning years across your entire working life. If you worked fewer than 35 years, the missing years are filled in as zeros, which drags the average down hard. Each of those 35 years is also adjusted through wage indexing, which translates older dollars into today's economic terms, so a salary from 1998 is compared fairly against a salary earned today. Once those years are averaged, the number runs through a formula that's deliberately progressive, replacing a larger percentage of income for lower earners than for higher earners. That's a policy choice, built in from the start, meant to keep the floor strongest for the people who need it most. Take Sarah, a teacher who worked 34 steady years in public education, never at a particularly high salary. Her benefit lands around $2,200 a month. Now compare her to her brother-in-law Tom, a corporate executive who spent 15 years at the very top of the income scale, but only worked 22 years total before retiring early. Despite his dramatically higher peak salary, Tom's benefit isn't proportionally higher than Sarah's, because those missing 0 years pull his 35-year average down hard. Consistency, in this formula, competes directly against peak income, and it often wins. Here's the counterintuitive idea most people never see coming. Tom, the higher earner, sometimes ends up feeling more frustrated by his benefit than Sarah does by hers because he expected the formula to reward income the way his salary always did. It doesn't. It rewards years. That single misunderstanding is responsible for a huge share of the disappointment people feel when they finally see their own benefit estimate for the first time. And this is exactly why a monthly benefit somewhere in the $2,000 to $3,000 range is so common. It's not the system being stingy, it's the realistic mathematical output of a formula built around 35 years of steady, moderate American wages. Reaching the actual maximum benefit requires earning at or above the taxable maximum for all 35 of those years, a far smaller, narrower group than the stories you hear about someone getting a huge check would suggest. But here's where almost everyone stops thinking too early. They see their monthly number, form an opinion about whether it's good or not enough, and move on. Almost nobody does the one calculation that actually changes how this entire benefit should be understood. Everyone fixates on the monthly figure because it's the number printed on the statement. Almost nobody multiplies it out into what it actually represents: a long-term, guaranteed, inflation-adjusted income stream. Take a retiree's starting benefits at 67 with a $2,400 monthly check. Run that forward across a realistic life expectancy into the mid to late 80s, roughly 20 years, factoring in the annual cost of living adjustments the program applies to help offset inflation. That modest monthly number quietly becomes a six-figure lifetime benefit. For a married couple where both spouses claim, that combined figure roughly doubles. Here's a comparison that makes this land emotionally, not just mathematically. If you wanted to privately purchase an income stream that pays a fixed, inflation-adjusted amount every month for the rest of your life, something insurance companies sell as an annuity, you'd need to hand over a substantial lump sum today to get it. Social Security functions similarly, except you've already paid into it your entire working life through payroll taxes, and it comes with built-in inflation protection that's genuinely rare to find in a privately purchased product, without paying a steep premium for it. Now think back to Mike, who retired early at 58 after selling a small business. Mike hasn't even started claiming Social Security yet. He's living off the proceeds from that sale, drawn down carefully year by year. When he does start claiming at 67, his check will slot in as one piece of an already well-established plan. But here's the emotional turn in Mike's story. When his advisor first showed him the lifetime value of the benefit he was choosing to delay, Mike admitted he'd never once thought of Social Security as an asset. He'd always thought of it as just a check. Seeing the six-figure number attached to it changed how he felt about the years he spent building his business in the first place, like the work had quietly been ensuring his future the whole time, without him realizing it. This reframe changes the emotional tone of everything we've covered. 1 in 4 retirees relies heavily on Social Security sounds like a warning. 1 in 4 retirees is leaning on a guaranteed income stream worth several $100,000 across their lifetime, describes the exact same group of people, and suddenly it doesn't sound like a crisis. It sounds like a system doing precisely what it was built to do. Remember Elaine and Robert from the beginning, same envelope, same check, Same statistic, two entirely different lives. Now you can see exactly why their stories split apart. Robert was using Social Security as a deliberate placeholder, letting other money keep compounding untouched behind him. Elaine genuinely had nothing else. That check was her whole floor and her whole ceiling. Both of them show up as identical data points in the exact statistic that opened this video. And that's the real lesson sitting underneath everything we've covered. The statistic was never lying to you. It was simply never built to answer the question most people assume it's answering. How much of your income comes from Social Security and how financially secure are you are two completely different questions with two completely different answers. The moment those get treated as the same thing, an ordinary, even smart financial decision like the one Robert made starts to look like a red flag it was never meant to be. So the next time you come across a scary-sounding retirement statistic, don't just ask, is this true? It almost always is, at least technically. Ask the harder, more useful question instead. What is this number actually measuring? And what is it quietly leaving out? Social Security was never meant to be judged by how much of your income it represents in a single year. It was meant to be judged by what it guarantees you every month for the rest of your life, no matter what the market is doing. Understood that way, it stops being something to fear and starts being something you can genuinely plan your future around. So here's a real question worth sitting with. If you added up your own Social Security benefit across the next 20 or 30 years, do you think you'd be surprised by how large that number actually is? Tell me in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. If this video helped you see this statistic differently, hit like, share it with someone who's worried about their retirement, and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.